Let's take a look at several application problems. Let's read through this one. $5,900 is invested, part of it at 11% and part of it at 9%. For a certain year, the total yield is $593. How much was invested at each rate? So we read through that and we see that we have two unknowns. How much was invested at each rate? We want to know the amount invested at 11% and the amount invested at 9%. We have two unknowns, so we might use the variables x and y for that. So to keep up with that much information, we might make a table looking something like part 1, part 2, and total. And to keep up with the amounts for those, remember we have already said that we don't know the amount for part 1. We could let that be our x. We don't know the amount for part 2. We could let that be y. We do know the total amount invested. Okay, $5,900 is invested, so we could put that number here. It's the total amount invested. Then we have a rate for each of the unknown categories here. It says that part 1, the first part of it, was at 11%, and our percent, I believe we could do more work or more effective work with that as a decimal. So let's write our percent as a decimal. That 11% I'm going to write as 0.11. Part 2, the other part of it, at 9%, I write that as 0.09 for 9%. Now we don't have a rate for the total. We don't have a rate for that, so we can fill that box in. Now when we invest something, what's the point of investing something? We're interested in earning money on that investment, aren't we? So this yield right here is what we earn on the investment. Okay, so we have earnings on part 1 and part 2. It says the total yield, so the earnings from part 1 and part 2 will total for a certain amount. So how do we express the earnings for part 1? Well, it's the amount times the rate, 11% of that amount, so we would show that as times 0.11x is the yield for that part, and 0.09y is the yield for this part. And then again, we're told that the total yield is $593. So we can write that total yield in this column here, $593. Now we need to look through our information and see if we can come up with equations. Well, it looks like all the rows are filled in here for amount. Does the first part and the second part add together for the total part? I believe that's one equation. So we would write equation 1 as x plus y is equal to 5,900. And do the two interest amounts add for the total interest? Yes, they should. So equation 2 is 0.11x plus 0.09y is equal to 593. So now we have two equations that we can work with. We want to work with these two just like we would any system of equations. We have a system of two equations now and two variables, and so we'd like to use substitution or elimination, and I believe that we'll rewrite these to use substitution. So the first thing I might do is multiply through equation 2 to clear the decimals. If we multiply through by 100, that should clear the decimals. So let's rewrite equation 2 here. Multiplied through by 100 gives us 11x plus 9y is equal to 59,300. We multiply this by 100. Now we could look back at equation 1 and say, what could we multiply this by to cancel the x's or the y's? We could multiply by negative 11 to cancel x's, or negative 9 to cancel the y's. Let's multiply by negative 9. You can multiply by either one. I'm going to show this multiplied by negative 9. That gives us negative 9x, negative 9y, and negative 9 times 5,900 gives us negative 53,100. Now we can add the new versions here of 1 and 2 to eliminate y. And we total the x columns. That gives us 2x. We total the constant column. Use your calculator on that. Should give you 6,200. Then we want to divide by 2 here and here to give us x is equal to 3,100 or 3,100. And let's go ahead and say, what did we say x stood for? It's part 1, which was invested at 11%. So we could say that's the part at 11%. Now what can we do? We can take the x value back to the easiest looking equation, which I believe is equation 1. So let's rewrite equation 1. X plus y is equal to 5,900. And let's substitute 3,100 for x. 3,100 plus y is equal to 5,900. And I would like to subtract 3,100 from both sides. I'll show it this way. Y is equal to, and do the math here, gives us 2,800. And remember that y, we let that stand for the part 2 amount invested at 9%. So we could say that's the part invested at 9%. Alright, and remember we should take those back to check, but a quick check would be to see if 3,100 and 2,800 add for 5,900. That's a quick check. Alright, and then to be extra cautious, we should take those numbers into this equation here and make sure they also check here.